voltage regulator module. The voltage regulator module is plugged into the power distribution panel to make sure we don't overload any of the different components of the robot, like the motor controllers or servos or things like that. If we had an Ethernet camera to tell where you are in relation to your surroundings from the perspective of the robot, you can also plug it into the voltage regulator module. Next, we're going to talk about servos. A servo is an actuator, sort of like an arm that can be used to control the steering of the robot or be mounted underneath an Ethernet camera to orient it the way you want it to. You can change the angle of the camera so you can look at different things while the robot remains stationary. Now we have digital and analog sensors. A digital sensor is a sensor like an infrared sensor that could tell you how far you are away from something or the different colors of an object. If you have to choose between several objects and you don't know their color, you can use this to tell the different colors of the objects. An analog sensor would be something like a gimbal or a gyroscope to tell the tilt of a robot, or something like a speed wheel to tell how fast the robot is going over the ground. Okay, so this is our robotics laptop/tablet that we use to control the robot, or to control the robot during the competitions and stuff like that. So this is a USB splitter, and this you plug into the base there, and then you can plug in the remotes, like the joystick or a controller like that, to control the robot. And this is an Ethernet adapter for USB, and when you plug it in, you can connect to their Wi-Fi router like this. And once you're connected, you have internet connection, and you can control your robot by doing that. And then also another thing this is used for is to plug into the Robo-Rio here to download the teleop program onto it, the stand-up, like the non-controlled portion of the competition. And once we've wired the robot entirely and have all the controllers set up, we plug this into the Robo-Rio right here into the port that we have for it, so that we can connect to the robot, and so we can control with the controllers.
Hello everyone, and welcome to Soldering 101 with Jason McKnight. We're going to go over the few basics of soldering and wires. First thing is, obviously, you got your wire right here. In the wire you have the actual wire itself, which is on the inside. It's usually copper, and you have a kind of rubberized coating on the outside to keep it from shorting out. You got your wire cutters / strippers. So basically these things do two things. You can cut the wires, and you also can take the plastic covering off. You have shrink tubing, which is put over the wires when you're done soldering, and you use heat to shrink it down, and it makes the solder all nice and clean. You got steel wool, which is used to clean the soldering iron, which I'll show you next. And basically it just gets the tip of the soldering iron clean so that you can it heats up well, and it also melts the wire very well. So then you have the soldering iron, which is basically just a heated rod that is connected to your outlet, and the tip here is what you actually use to solder with, and you use that, you heat up the wire, and then you heat up the actual solder itself, and you use the solder to fuse the two wires together. You have your solder here. It's basically just wire, very bendy wire, and you use that and you melt it onto the wire itself once you have it stripped, and this is what holds the two wires together. And then this is just a piece of paper towel. It's soaked in water, and you use this when the iron is hot to clean it. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to go through cutting wire. So you can see on here, these are one of the nice pairs, and it actually has labels for things, and so it has a label wire cutter, and so that's where you know where to put the wires. What you're going to do is you're going to slip the wire through there, go to your desired length, and just clip. I'm flying, that's okay, we can do another one. Perfect. Okay, and then to strip it, there's different like gauges of wire that you can strip. Basically, since we're working with fairly small wire, I go with a smaller one. So you basically, there's little like half circles that you put the wire in between, and you basically just press down on it and pull, and you can see once you pull it off, the wire comes nice and it's exposed, ready to solder. So one tip that really helps is if you kind of twist the wire, so you grab the end of it and kind of rotate it around like this, and it gives you a nice like condensed set of wires for you to be able to solder with. So we're going to solder 2 wires together. I'm going to cut a little bit more wire, make it a little bit longer so it's easier to show. Cut this piece of black. We're going to go solder black onto red. So here's your black one, and then a little bit longer piece. And there's your red one, right? And then we're going to strip it real quick. Sometimes stripping can be a little bit finicky. Sometimes it doesn't want to cut the first time, and so you might have to move down to a smaller hole size in order to get it to actually strip. And sometimes it just doesn't want to do it at all. That's cool. There it goes. Okay. Got the wire nice and exposed there. I'm going to rotate it. And onto black. Let's go like there, should be good. Now, right, messed up on that. Let's cut it off. Quick little tip when you're soldering: make sure you leave long tails on the end of the wires, because if you don't, you're going to have a hard time getting the wires to stick to each other. You're not going to have a lot of like surface area to solder, and so, for God's sakes, you can tell I'm a sailor because I'm weak and I can't strip wire. There we go. That's probably plenty long. Okay, now let's cut it. And I found that it's usually better to strip the wire before you cut it, because you kind of have to hold on to the wire while you're stripping it and kind of keep it really tight so you can pull the covering off. And it's really hard to do that if it's just a really tiny piece. Okay, so now you got your 2 sets of wire right here, actually. And so right now, as you can see, one end is a lot longer than the other just by where you stripped it, so you can actually go through and cut the individual strands off a little bit. Let's just cut that much off. Let's see if that actually works. Or maybe not. This is probably not the right tool for this. Yeah, oh well. Whatever. We can make it work. We can make it work. So you're going to do the twist again on the wire, just like this. And you're going to have them together. And basically what you're going to do, you're going to twist the wires around each other so they kind of interlock like that. And that's what you want. You want to be able to, like, as you start off, you want to be able to pull it a little bit so that they don't want to come apart. I don't know, I started to, darn it, oh well. You basically want to set it so that they won't want to come apart originally, and the wires are for sure nice and interlocked. So the next step is you actually want to heat up the wire itself with the soldering iron, and this will help the actual solder to stick to it better. Actually, I just reminded myself of something. Before you start soldering, you want to make sure the tip of the soldering iron is clean. So you can either go through, use the steel wool and just kind of brush it in the steel wool, get the excess solder off of it that was used during the last solder, whoever used it last, or you can use this and kind of just marks on it like this, and it'll get it as clean as possible. Okay. So we've had the soldering iron warmed up, so you don't have to worry about that. And so you just make sure the wire's kind of warm before you start using it. And then what you can do is you take the solder in one hand, so the other hand to help. My lovely assistant Ryan is going to come hold the band of wires together because it's all off the table. Let's see, there it goes. So you want to make sure when you touch the soldering iron to the solder that it kind of beads up and bubbles like it is right now. And that means it's hot and it's ready to go on to the actual solder. Very poorly done. It's been a while since I've done this, so bear with me here for a second. You basically just want to kind of make beads of it on there. So you like, what just happened there? That's good. And you kind of want to spread it around a little bit. You want to get it hot so it turns into a liquid again, more or less. Even though it may not do it. There it goes. You kind of just want to spread it around in the gaps between the wires. You want to make sure that you kind of get a general even coating all the way around to make sure that there's no way that it can come undone, because that's the greatest problem with soldering, and that's the whole point of soldering, is to keep the wires together. Come on. Okay. Alright, so welcome back to Soldering 101. So we got our nice little bit of solder here, and thanks to the help from Cameron and John, we got it all nice and soldered. It looks very nice, doesn't it? See all the silver right there? Yeah, that's all the solder. It looks good, doesn't it? We covered the entire copper part in the solder. So one thing we realized as we took a little break to finish is that we didn't put the shrink tubing on beforehand, which is fine now because we can just take one of the ends and just slide it over like that. Perfect. The problem is if you actually had this on the robot at this end or this end were connected to something, that would make it really hard. So you need to make sure you put the solder on before you actually, or you need to make sure you put the shrink tubing on, before the solder. So that was just, it wasn't a mistake, it was just a happy accident. So the way shrink tubing works is it basically, it reacts with heat. So right now it's bigger than the actual size of the object we're trying to shrink wrap. You know what? That's okay, because it'll change. So as of now, we don't actually have a heat gun, which would be the optimal tool to do this with, but the soldering iron will work just as well, I think. You just hold it close, make sure not put it actually on the shrink tubing. Just put it around, put it underneath, you can move it around, try not to burn the shrink wrap. It smells bad. Shrink tubing, just a happy accident. You kind of want to keep it in the same place so it conforms. Cody, I've run out of things to say.
You actually can run it on the shrink tubing,
You can put it
and
on
it'll
there.
shrink it faster.
Yeah, put it on there.
It
smokes, it doesn't matter.
you sure?
Screw the environment.
I've burned my shrink tubing and it still works.
Alright. But yeah, hopefully if Wallace gets his stuff together, we'll get a heat gun so we could actually do this properly and efficiently. It's okay though. It's not a problem. It's just a happy accident.
Just touch it to the shrink tubing.
Put it on the shrink tubing.
Alright, well, my fellow solderers are telling me to hurry up, so I'll just hurry up the process a little bit. Go ahead and flip it over. Make sure you get the ends. Try and get right there, nice and hot. See, it's already starting to melt.
The table.
Where's my piece of glass?
Just like burn the table.
It's fine.
Soldering 101.
Soldering 101. You gotta make sure it gets...
Rats, you taught them to burn the table.
It didn't burn the table. See, there's just residue from the shrink wrap on it. You just wipe it off real quick. It's almost there. Alright, so that's about as good as we're going to get with this shrink tubing, but as you can see, it's kind of gotten tight around the middle section where the two wires meet. And yeah, there's Soldering 101 with Jesse McKnight and friends.